The kryptonite for the Toronto Raptors franchise at that particular moment in time was LeBron James. The year he arrived, LeBron James went to LA. Right. So my attitude is, had Demar Derozan stayed there, he'd have been a champion with the Toronto Raptors. How do you feel about that once you hear something like that?
For sure, I definitely feel like that. You know, the only person we couldn't beat was LeBron. That's just what it was. And I felt off the year we had before, we just needed one more piece to kind of push us over the top. That piece came to be LeBron going to the West, you know, and I didn't get an opportunity to see what would happen, but the utmost confidence within myself, I have no doubt in my mind the same outcome would have happened.
No. DeMar DeRozan, I don't think you understand the weight of those 25 seconds on First Take mean for you. This is the same DeMar DeRozan who mentally checks out every time LeBron comes to town. This is the same DeMar DeRozan who routinely plays down to expectations to the point that people created a nickname for it, and we all know what it is, DeMar DeFrozen. This is the same DeMar DeRozan who played so bad that the coach of the year got fired as a scapegoat of the team. And finally, this is the same DeMar DeRozan that finally forced the hands of Masai Ujiri to trade the face of the franchise for a very disgruntled Kawhi Leonard who had no plans of staying in Toronto after that year in the ultimate NBA trade rental, just for a chance, a better chance to win the Larry O'Brien Trophy. And what did that turn into? One of the best playoff runs in our modern era and an NBA championship. Sure, not one that is respected by a lot of people, but a championship that you yourself could not bring in 5 years of playoff contention. So in today's video, I would like to go over the many shortcomings of DeMar DeRozan and the Toronto Raptors in his many years competing with the Raptors to shut down the narrative that DeMar DeRozan could have done the same thing that Kawhi Leonard did in his one season that he could not do in 5. Because while I understand saying that he couldn't would have made him look bad, him also saying that simply LeBron James being gone would have been his ticket to the Larry O'Brien Trophy is absolutely wrong. And by the end of this video, you'll have the exact same opinion. With that being said, if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to like the video as we are now officially on the road to 100,000 subscribers. So be sure to subscribe to be a part of that and of course to catch more videos. But as usual, this will be a long one, but you already know who it is. Wow it!
3, 2, 1.
Weights in the weight room, so he stitched up in the left.
The peak of the sports wave is finally here. The NFL, NBA, college football, and basketball are up and started, and there's plenty to watch. But what is a better way to witness great moments and have a great time than actually watching it live? Well, if you want to take advantage and see some action yourself, then my sponsor Gametime would be the perfect option for you. The best ticket marketplace out there for sporting events in more than 60 cities across the US and Canada, right from your phone or PC. As a sports buff and of course a basketball YouTuber, there isn't anything more I love to do than watch a sporting event live, and Gametime is what I use to get myself the best deals and features to make the process simpler and save money. Take a look at this upcoming game with the Hawks and the Pistons. For so little money, you can have such a great time watching the #1 pick of the 2024 draft class and Trae Young go against an up and rising Detroit Pistons team. But there is more you can take advantage of, like their newest feature called Gametime Pick, where with a press of a button you can find the best deals while canceling out all the other tickets without them. Of course, getting views from the seats to get a good idea of how things will look when you go to the event, and their lowest price guaranteed, where if you find a ticket at a better price, Gametime will credit you with 110% of the difference in return. And recently I used all these great features to go to my first ever Dallas Mavericks game to watch them play the Houston Rockets and had a great time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Alvini for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code ALVINI for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? Game time. And thank you again for Gametime for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into it. We We start our story in the 2013-14 NBA season. The Toronto Raptors haven't made the playoffs since the 2008 season as a 41-41 team and are looking to go in a new direction. After the firing of longtime GM Brian Colangelo, we would witness one of the best hirings the Raptors would ever commit to in promoting the assistant GM of the team, Masai Ujiri, to the head GM spot for the foreseeable future. And with this change, he brings immediate success to the team in many ways. His first move was trading away the first overall pick of the 2016 NBA class in Andrea Bargnani to the New York Knicks for a myriad of older players and multiple picks. The Knicks were desperate for some type of success at the time, and Masai knew that Andrea wasn't going to serve much more to their future in the slightest, so rather than as well get rid of his contract for some future capital for him at least. But with this trade, the thought were that the Raptors were fine with more years of tanking and trying to find somebody in the draft to join the really interesting mix of players coming up in their prime and young players trying to find their place in this core. The main core of Demar Derozan, Rudy Gay, and newcomer Kyle Lowry isn't exactly a trio of players who played the best together and contributed to their under 500 record last year on top of the injuries to Rudy Gay. But as this team gets older, changes were going to need to be made or someone is going to need to improve. But luckily for the Raptors, Masai Ujiri was the man of the job to get this thing done. Going into the 2014 NBA season, the Raptors were back to being underwhelming again with a 7-12 start to the season, and that would serve as the final straw. Someone had to be moved for the betterment of this team, and that person would be Rudy Gay, possibly the most expendable player in that trio of the team, who would be traded on December 8, 2013 to the Sacramento Kings for Chuck Hayes, Patrick Patterson, Grievous Vasquez, and John Salmons. According to ESPN, this was part of Masai's plan to offload large contracts on the team in exchange of expiring contracts to open up space for the team and create flexibility in their cap space. But according to other sources, Rudy Gay wasn't exactly a big fan of being in Toronto also, so it works out for both sides here. You go from cold Toronto to sunny Sacramento. Unfortunately though, Sacramento's property, so yeah, good luck over there. But this also means that the Raptors are now committing to their 2009 lottery pick in Demar Derozan, who is already looking better in the early part of the season. And of course, a 27-year-old Kyle Lowry, who is also coming into his own in this new environment and second year on the team. In fact, some people can argue that the Toronto Raptors are potentially ahead of schedule because from December 13th until the All-Star break, the Raptors would have their best stretch of basketball in years, going 21-12 and seeing their team absolutely transformed into a well-oiled machine. And it stops at the top with Demar Derozan breaking out finally. As the face of the team, he is now tasked with leading this team consistently to wins, and with Rudy Gay gone, who is consistently considered a black hole offensively, with Demar being the guy, the Raptors can now win. At this point in the season, Demar would average a career-high 22 points a game with 4 assists a night. Of course, he had his shooting slumps and woes, getting used to his role, scoring at a below-average rate, but the Raptors are winning, so this can be ignored for now. But this first half of the season also turned into Demar Derozan representing the Raptors in the 2014 All-Star Game for the first time of his career, which now means that Demar is a household name in the NBA. From this point on, the Toronto Raptors are going to be taken seriously, and it's up to the Raptors and Demar himself to lead the Six to a place they've never even sniffed before, the NBA Finals. But going down the roster, there are a lot of contributing factors that made the Raptors officially a formidable team. Kyle Lowry is now finding his home in Toronto as the point guard and second in command, with Demar being the team's top playmaker and top 10 in the NBA in assists, while also being top 10 in made threes that year. You have a second-year Jonas Valanciunas looking to be a double-double threat on a game-to-game basis, improving and looking like a center for the future for this team. Terrence Ross taking advantage of his new upgraded role on the team with Rudy Gay gone, being a microwave scorer for them, where his best performance came in a 50-point explosion against the Clippers that year, and even getting contributions from their bigs off the bench and the starting power forward in Amir Johnson as an interior presence, and the newly traded Patrick Patterson for his shooting off the bench. Overall, this created a very fun and dangerous Toronto Raptors team that ranked both top 10 in offense and defensive rating. And you know what they say about teams that are both top 10 in those categories, they are most likely to win a championship. Now, the Toronto Raptors in position to win right now, probably not, but this is a perfect way for both the players and the front office to see if any further changes are needed to be made for the future, or if they can compete with this current core. But as the Raptors continue their good times and a very fun season for anyone in Canada, the Raptors finished their season 20-10 with a final record of 48-34, their best record since the 2007 season, and also finished third in the Eastern Conference. And while I don't want to say this was also the best record the Raptors ever had in their entire franchise history. Yes, you heard that right. 48 wins at this point, at least, is their franchise record. Remember that the Toronto Raptors was created in 1996, and the good times were pretty few and far in between. Before a team like this to win 48 games compared to ones led by Vince Carter and Chris Bosh, that's pretty wild. But this is also at the time when the Eastern Conference was possibly at their worst. But I won't discredit them for that. That would be mean. But with this 48-win record, they also claim the third seed and get home court advantage in a playoff series for the first time in a long time. And their first new test in this DeMar DeRozan-led era is against the 6-seeded Brooklyn Nets and their very weirdly created team led by a 32-year-old Joe Johnson and other very much dwindling stars in their twilight years. But I don't think very many people remember this also, but the Nets actually lost their last 2 games intentionally to face off against the Raptors in the first round. So this matchup was absolutely planned from the start in every way for the Nets to complete the 3-6 series upset. But with that being said, the Raptors are now in their first ever playoff series in years, and it's time to see what they are capable of against an aging Nets team. Well, game 1 will show a lot of things to be desired, and even one thing that'll turn into the theme of this video, and as you'd imagine, in DeMar DeRozan's first ever playoff game and being game played against in this type of a setting, he'd start his playoff career with a 3 of 13 shooting nights while also going 0 of 4 from 3. Obviously, as a 24-year-old first-time All-Star, having games like this is pretty much the norm when the Raptors aren't expected to beat the likes of the Heat and Pacers, but you rather as well get as much experience as possible in your first ever playoff run. But they still need to beat the Nets, who they lost to in game 1, 94-87, due to the combined efforts of Joe Johnson and Deron Williams scoring 24 points apiece, and of course, the other main headline being DeMar DeRozan's first ever playoff game and 19 turnovers from the Raptors in general. But there's plenty of room for error as long as they do not lose game 2, which they would bounce back and do, winning 195 and seeing DeMar DeRozan come up clutch with scoring the last 6 of the 7 points and sealing the game away with free throws, absolutely making up for his game 1 blunder. Overall, he finished off with 30 points, but where he really shined was in the fourth quarter, scoring 17 points where he'd go 4 or 5 from the field and make 9 of 11 of his free throws, becoming the absolute hero of the game. Both of these teams are fighting at an equal level, and this series can certainly go to 7 games in the right circumstance, and game 3 would show that to be true. This time we're a night where the Raptors would have to come back by as much as 15 in the fourth quarter, but even though they would bring it down to a 2-point lead with only 20 seconds left after 2 missed free throws from Patrick Patterson, the Raptors would lose the game by 4 points. And just like game 1, this was headlined by Joe Johnson and Deron Williams combining for 51 points, and once again, DeMar DeRozan having a questionable game, going 8 of 22 from the field, but he at least clutched up by going 13 of 15 from the free throw line. And before you say anything, the comeback of the fourth quarter was started by Patrick Patterson, who went a perfect 4 of 4 and 2 of 2 from 3 for 10 points. His only flaw was missing those last 2 free throws that could have tied the game, but it happens to everybody. Game 4 would see a pretty nasty game from both sides though, but it would result in a win for the Raptors, 87-79. They end up locking up the duo of Deron Williams and Joe Johnson for only 17 points combined and made them turn over the ball 7 times. It wasn't pretty for the Raptors though. DeMar DeRozan once again didn't have the best stat line with a 7-19 shooting night for 24 points, but being able to drop free throws might be his best skill in this series, going 9 of 11 from the line. But a win is a win, and their top 10 defense showed itself to be real that night. And with a 2-2 series, game 5 will be the most important of this series, giving whoever wins all the momentum to finish this off. And with a 2-point victory due to the 10-point fourth quarter performance of DeMar DeRozan, the Raptors were able to beat the Nets to get the 3-2 series lead and are only 1 game away from making it to the second round for the first time since 2001. Again, the Raptors haven't had very many good moments in their franchise to this point. However, game 6, the Raptors lost under their opportunity to end this series once and for all, and this time DeMar DeRozan wasn't even the reason for it. In his best game of the series, DeMar would have an amazing 28-point game, going 8 of of 18, 2 of 3 from 3, and of course, at a long 10 of 11 from the free throw line. The Raptors realistically could have won this game with their best players finally having a good performance, but this time, Kyle Lowry went 4 of 16, and the Nets played slightly better, which ended up forcing a Game 7. The exact scenario a lot of people saw happening from this series. Both teams don't have a complete advantage over the other, and the Nets have a lot of playoff experience, unlike the Raptors. But luckily for them, home court advantage is in their hands for Game 7, and this game is the most important game for them in a long time. So with that being said, Game 7, Toronto, Canada, 6 seconds remaining. The Raptors are only down by 1 point after coming back from an 11-point fourth quarter deficit. Once again, the Nets showed their experience is forever more valuable than the talent that Toronto had, with Joe Johnson dominating the game once again with another 26.9 and 13 of those points coming in the fourth quarter alone. But with the Raptors needing another miracle to win this series, here comes Kyle Lowry to put them back in the game with 13 of his total 28 points being scored in the fourth quarter when the team needed him most. And with Terrence Ross scoring with 9 seconds left with a layup and also getting a clutch steal on Sean Livingston, the game is now in the Raptors' hands after a Dwayne Casey timeout. We all knew who was going to get the last shot. It's obviously going to the hot hand Kyle Lowry. And with the series, the game, and basketball in Canada on the line, how does this last possession of the series turn out?
Still looking. Gets it to Lowry at 5 seconds. Lowry, Williams the tight defense. Here is Lowry on the deck through 2. Lowry put it up. It's blocked by Pierce, and the Nets win the series. As Paul Pierce, waiting in front of the rim, denies the shot and sends Brooklyn to the second round.
I think this possession is the perfect example of how the Raptors are just not ready for contention yet. In a game-winning situation to go to the second round, Kyle Lowry basically does a 1v5. No second option, no looks to pass out. Just let Kyle Lowry get the final shot no matter what. 6 seconds in this situation is a lot of time to get a good shot, but instead we get this really botched and fucked up play that ends in a Paul Pierce block at the front of the basket. And the end of the series for the Toronto Raptors in this wild 7-game series. But even with this slightly disappointing end of the year, there's still a lot to be excited about for the future, whether it's the improvement of the many young players on this team, the high amount of cap space to use, and just the overall synergy and chemistry the team can build upon to be better off for the future. Well, there's a lot to be looking forward to. Overall though, we would see Demar Derozan look worse than he did in the regular season by a wide margin, but his free throw shooting really did keep his team above water, and I actually mean it. He went 71 of 79 from the free throw line in this 7-game series, but of course, his 38% from the field needs to be improved upon, or else this team isn't going anywhere, and some could say he was a direct reason because of them losing. But this team is still very young though, and this is only his first strike. There are plenty of more chances for DeMar to help this team make it to the promised land, but will he help or hinder their chances in the future? So, after a very interesting first time in the playoffs for the DeMar Derozan-led Toronto Raptors, where do we go from here? Well, the only answer is up. In the mid-2010s, the Eastern Conference was at its worst it has ever been, with the only consistent threat at the time being the Indiana Pacers led by Paul George and the Miami Heat led by the Heatles themselves. But even that won't be the case anymore, with Paul George unfortunately having his brutal leg injury in the summer and LeBron James moving back to Cleveland. So honestly, it's just LeBron James that is the only threat, the only real threat in the conference. With that in mind, a DeMar Derozan-led championship team only becomes much more of a reality as the months roll by, but considering who'll be dominating the NBA out of the Western Conference for the coming years, that conversation might need to be shut down a little bit. Anyways, the Raptors now have a core that can win games, a coach that created a pretty consistent game plan, and a GM who is in his first year made moves that created this situation in the first place. And now it's his and DeMar DeRozan's job to finish it. Masai Ujiri would go about this summer to add more talent towards their offense. It starts with adding perennial top 6 man in the league, Lou Williams, who on June 29, 2014 will be traded from the Hawks for simply John Salmons. Some would consider this an underpay for Lemon Pepper Lou, but just like the Andrea Bargnani trade in New York, it was mostly due to cap space reasons, as John Salmons made $7 million and the Hawks wanted to waive and buy out his contract to open up more space. And with Lou Williams being an expiring contract himself, he was the perfect pawn to give up in this move and a perfect player for the Raptors to receive to have more firepower off the bench on an already lethal offensive squad. But while that was the only major move the Raptors made that summer, it was the only one they really needed, because the 2015 season was a major improvement upon last year, starting the year off 24-7, their best start in franchise history. And as you'd imagine at that point in the season, the Raptors were the best team in the East and the second best team in the league record-wise. Of course, you're going to have your deniers talking about how bad the Eastern Conference was at the time, but for anyone who lived in Canada, they weren't hearing any of it, because this is the best the Raptors have ever looked, possibly ever. Some may even forget that DeMar DeRozan had a major left adductor tendon that ended up getting torn that took him out for 2 months, but even without him, the Raptors would still continue to find ways to win. But this was because they owned the fourth best offense in the NBA, led by the likes of Kyle Lowry and the six-man sensation that is Lou Williams, averaging a career-high 15 points off the bench. Add along Jonas Valanciunas taking on more offensive responsibilities, and you have many people thinking that the Raptors might actually be a playoff threat. But not entirely, because remember, this was the same season where the Hawks ended up winning 60 games and sent 4 All-Stars. Because again, and say it with me, the Eastern Conference at the time was poverty. And most people knew that to be the case because they knew the Cleveland Cavaliers with LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love were going to be the real team to beat, who were, going through their own growing pains for sure, but this is also a team you do not want to see in the playoffs, no matter how bad they did in the regular season. But even with this amazing start to the season, the Raptors would slow down production ever so slowly, going on to lose the next 8 of their 11 games, and then from the All-Star break until the end of the season, they would go 13-16. Now, while this may have been a very underwhelming end to the season after that great start, it does end on a happy note, because after a 92-87 win against the Charlotte Hornets in the last game of the season, the Raptors would once again garner a new franchise win record, going 49-33 to end the season. But going into the postseason, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of concern for this Raptors squad that makes them a perennial first round out as the 4th seed. The main reason being the Raptors were one of the most polarizing teams in the NBA. Sure, they owned a top 5 offense in the league, but they also owned a bottom 5 defense in the NBA. And this is coming off a season where they went top 10. And to give some context, this year the Raptors allowed teams to score from the 2-point range at over a 50% clip, which surprisingly wasn't even the worst in the league, and they were ranked bottom 3 in that. I can imagine why, having a pretty small front court outside of Valanciunas, but this aspect of their game would be a pretty big weakness for them to overcome. Even with that in mind, we would still see a pretty interesting slump this season from DeMar DeRozan, who you can blame on the injury for sure, but he averaged 20 points per game again, but also as an interior scorer, scored at a 41% clip. And as this team's most reliable scorer come playoff time, it comes down to him to perform when the team really needs him to make it to the second round for the first time in his career, because their defense won't bail them out like last year. But there is someone on this team to congratulate, as Lou Williams will be celebrated as the 2015 Sixth Man of the Year award for the first time in his career, being a huge reason why this offense was top 5 in the NBA. But credit is also need to be given to Masai Ujiri for getting so much value in Lou Williams for so little. However, Lou Williams is a free agent after the season. He's going to want to be paid for his role, but who knows how that'll turn out. Finally, though, we make it to the postseason. The Raptors once again almost won 50 games and even have home court advantage in the first round for the second year in a row. This time against the Washington Wizards, led by the rising backcourt duo of John Wall and Bradley Beal, and one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. It must be said, though, I'm pretty sure the Raptors were very confident in this matchup, considering that they swept the series against them in the regular season, but the playoffs are a different beast, and the Raptors will once again learn that the hard way. Both of these teams are complete polar opposites, and it will make for a very interesting series. The Raptors are a top offensive team and a bottom tier defense, while the Wizards are a top defense and a bottom tier offense, despite the talent on their team. But I don't think anyone could have predicted how this series turned out with all of this in mind. Game 1 would see the Raptors starting off the playoffs at home once again and already down by 15 midway through the third quarter, again against one of the best defenses in the NBA. But in an all-time collapse by the Wizards, the Raptors would slowly come back off the efforts of Lou Williams, Krivas Vasquez, and basically anyone who came off the bench that night for the Raptors. In fact, this game, the Raptors would see their bench, yes, their bench outscore their starters altogether, and once again, see Demar Derozan crumble in the playoffs with a horrible 6 of 20 start to the series. But luckily for the Raptors, the bench squad would fully complete the comeback and send this game into overtime.
Beal falls down. Vasquez for the tie. GV shaking him up.
I think moments like this really show just how great and weird the NBA can be sometimes. The entire starting lineup falters, but leave it to the bench in a playoff game to extend this game even further. However, despite this amazing comeback, all that magic would run out for the Raptors as they would ended up dying out to the Wizards as they would finish the job in OT, winning game 1, 93-86. From this point on, you just knew that this series was going to be very interesting, but not in the way you'd expect. Game 2 was another matchup where the Raptors' weaknesses came to light, allowing a bottom-tier offensive team to score 117 points, and while both teams were hitting all cylinders offensively, the Wizards just did enough to win this game comfortably, 117-106. In the playoffs, you need a solid mix of offense and defense to win series after series, but if your offense doesn't get the job done, the defense needs to do it. And with the subject of our videos, the Toronto Raptors having a bottom-tier defense, it's going to be even harder for Toronto to pull this off. And now being down 0-2 and losing home court advantage, it's time to push the panic button as they travel to Washington, D.C. Game 3 was more of the same from Game 2. John Wall diced the Raptors for 15 assists, with his main target being Marcin Gortat, who crushed the Raptors for 24 points on 11 of 15 shooting. But the entire team was on fire for the game as the Wizards shot 47% from the field and went 12 of 29 from 3. Again, this is the mid-2010s. We didn't take too many threes back then. The Wizards have the talent to play decent ball on offense, but in the playoffs, they are abusing the Raptors despite their regular season performance. And again, it starts back with Demar Derozan, who put all of this pressure into his own hands to come back in the series, going 11 of 29 for 32 points. And yes, 7 of 7 from the free throw line, but that 37% from the field is not helping the team. And alongside 5 of 22 from Kyle Lowry, you get a 99-106 loss from the Raptors to now go down 0-3. To the point of this series, no team has ever came back 0-3, and only one team has ever brought things back to a game 7, and the Raptors are in a really desperate situation to find any type of momentum. The only reasons they were even competing at one point was because of their bench making a Herculean effort to bring this game into overtime in game 1, and that is in no way going to be the reason they win this series if they even expect something realistic to happen. So now with the series and the season on the line, game 4 ends in the most disappointing way possible, 125-94. Leave it to one of the worst defensive teams in the league to make the Wizards look like a contender, but what makes the playoffs is the fact that John Wall dominated the series, averaging 12.5 assists. Marcin Gortat dominated the paint all series, hitting over 74% of his shots, and Paul Pierce averaged over 50% from 3. All around masterclass from the Wizards and a complete breakdown of the Raptors, especially from the defensive end. Once again, was the Raptors expected to be a contender? I'd honestly say probably at this point, no. But this team is still not ready nonetheless, and Demar Derozan is still having his issues as a true leader in the aspect of winning games for his team in the playoffs. And also, getting swept is not a good look at all. But there is still time to improve, still time to make changes, and still time to take advantage of the weakest era in the Eastern Conference we will possibly ever see in our lifetime. So with that in mind, the DeMar DeRozan era is still going strong, and the Raptors have a lot of money to take advantage of this summer. How much more patience will Masai Ujiri have in this core before something needs to change at the top of it? Because if their main player can't win games in the playoffs, then something has to give eventually. However, this summer will show that the Raptors mean business, and this next season will be a big indicator for things to come. So, here we go again. Back at square one, the Toronto Raptors, after their best season of all time, ended up getting swept by the Washington Wizards, are now trying to figure out what more can they do? Sure, the likes of Demar and Kyle could be much better, and I mainly mean that from the aspect of efficiency, but the first go around, their defense kept them in games, and the next year, where they relied more on their offense, it backfired and turned into a sweep. So what can be done? DeMar DeRozan isn't a playoff performer. Kyle Lowry also has his own issues in the postseason, and the team could honestly use help all around, all things considering. So we have to go back to the man himself, Masai Ujiri, the person who was tasked to fix everything. DeMar and Kyle are still growing into a duo, and they could use some more help towards their goal of winning an NBA championship. So with all the cap space Masai has been opening up throughout the years, what type of talent will he bring in this summer? Well, the summer of 2015 will be the time where the Raptors completely buy into this duo and give them as much help as possible. DeMar Carroll, the 3-and-D star from Atlanta, 4 years and $58 million. Corey Joseph, a backup point guard with championship experience with the Spurs, 4 years, $29 million. Luis Scola, a 1 year and $2 million deal to be their starter. And Bismack Biyombo, 2 years and $5 million. Masai Ujiri would absolutely tear down the team that they had last year and make moves to make the Raptors more balanced for their future goal. Of course, that does mean that some sacrifices have to be made also. Grievous Vasquez, the man who made the game-tying shot against the Washington Wizards last postseason, will be traded to the Milwaukee Bucks on draft night for UCLA product Norman Powell and a 2017 first-round pick. Amir Johnson would move on to the Boston Celtics to become their new starter, and another major blow was allowing the sixth man of the year, Lou Williams, to go to the Los Angeles Lakers. And not even for a lot of money either. I'm sure it was a bidding war the Raptors didn't want to compete in, but that is quite the player to lose off of your bench. But the idea is become more balanced, and Masai accomplished that greatly. Now it's time for DeMar and Kyle to take advantage, and you can tell the Raptors were going to be a different beast this year. Kyle Lowry, who is mostly known to be on the chunky and overweight side of things, comes into training camp completely transformed into a much more toned and muscular build meant to be able to last into deep playoff runs. And while the main point of conversation about DeMar DeRozan in the preseason was about his upcoming contract extension, all of that noise will be drowned out by the Raptors having another historic start to their year and looking way different than they did the year before. By the All-Star break this time around, you see the Raptors shatter their last year's start to the season with a 35-17 record and battling the Cleveland Cavaliers for the top seed in the Eastern Conference. And while last year was all about offense, this year you saw the Raptors look like one of the most balanced and deep teams in the NBA, and also officially having one of the best duos in the league. To start from the top, DeMar DeRozan, after all the seasons of inefficient basketball, is now one of the most consistent stars in the league this season as he rose his efficiency shooting and became a much more lethal mid-range shooter. This year, he'd average a career-high 23 points per game, and we really start to see him becoming a mid-range assassin that we know of him now. And for reference, he was 6th in the NBA this year in mid-ranges made. But of course, this also came with the rise of Kyle Lowry, who some would say was even better than DeMar this season, whose body transformation translated on the court, averaging a career-high 21 points and becoming a near 40% three-point shooter, while also being the Raptors' best playmaker. And with two 20-point scorers leading your team, this puts the Raptors in prime position to win a championship finally, as their living bromance in Kyle and DeMar continues to find the chemistry to take them all the way. It goes without saying that these two obviously contributed to the Raptors owning a top 5 offense once again and being the second best team in opponents' points per game due to their second slowest pace in the league. But this style of play obviously makes the Raptors a more formidable team, slowing things down to a near playoff pace. But with this duo being so great and with amazing timing, both DeMar and Kyle will be celebrated as all-stars in the 2016 All-Star Game being played in Toronto, Canada, where DeMar came off the bench in his second appearance and Kyle, surprisingly, was voted in as a starter in his first ever appearance in this game. This is exactly what Raptors fans were looking for. It started with getting rid of some potential rotten apples in the tree, and everything started to grow year by year until it cultivated into what it is now. The Raptors, for the first time in forever, are being treated like a real threat, especially as both of them and the Cavs are the only teams gunning for the first place spot and with a 50-win season. Even though we were both seeing the surging Warriors looking like new overlords of the league, the Raptors can still at least stand a challenge to the defending champions if they finally play the way they need to in the playoffs. Unfortunately though, the Cavaliers would never give up their first spot in the league at all, And the Raptors would have to be content with a second seed ranking and not having home court advantage all the way through if they face the Cavaliers in the third round. But that is only a small bump in the road, and honestly, who cares? Because the Raptors have so much to celebrate. With their 3-game win streak at the end of the season, the Raptors created their best ever record in franchise history for the third time in this video, with a record of 56-26, absolutely blowing out their last record out of the water from last year. I already spoke about why they were so successful before, and I won't bore you with that again. So instead, how about some simple recognition from the NBA, as Kyle Lowry will be awarded a spot on the All-NBA third team for his all-around game, leading the NBA in steals per game, being top 15 in assists, and of course his overall impact towards the Raptors being where they are now going into the 2016 playoffs. Of course, when you're in the same league as people like Kawhi, LeBron, PG, and KD, it's kind of hard to fit DeMar DeRozan on an All-NBA list, but his All-Star selection should be enough considering the circumstances of him being a guard and for some people a forward. Some fans would even argue again that Kyle was even better than DeMar, but I'm not going into that debate in the slightest. Anyways, getting away from all that, the Raptors are a real threat to make the finals, possibly for the first time in their entire history. And everybody will be watching with great interest to see what they can do in the playoffs for the third straight year in a row. The last two were signified by inexperience and bad play from the stars, but with both of them leveling up this year, they can both take it to the promised land together to go to their first finals in franchise history. But their first start to this path would be a 2-7 series against the Indiana Pacers. Indiana just a few years ago were fighting with the Miami Heat every year in the conference finals for a spot in the finals. But after a few unfortunate years, they are now a husk of what they used to be, but are still being led by Paul George, who is now back better than ever after his brutal leg injury a couple summers ago. And due to that, some people saw the Pacers as a potential upset creator alongside their top 3 defense. And we know how DeMar DeRozan reacts to a great defense. So what will be in store for us in this series? Well, game number 1, well, unfortunately, would just show old habits coming right back to haunt the Raptors, with a top 5 offense getting shut down for only 90 points, and DeMar DeRozan going cold with a 5-19 shooting night alongside Kyle Lowry's 3 of 13, and the Raptors losing game 1, 90-100. Despite having the lead at times during the game and could have even potentially won the game, Paul George sealed the game with a 10-point fourth quarter. Now, let's give them the slight benefit of the doubt, because DeMar is being guarded by one of the best defenders in the league in Paul George, alongside one of the best defensive teams in the league. But after 2 disappointing series so far, the excuse for DeMar and Kyle are going to be running thin, and they'll continuously be considered a regular season team if they allow another upset to happen. Game 2 was a slugfest where the Raptors led for all but 52 seconds, seeing Jonas Valanciunas dominate the paint for 23 points, and the pace being so slow that they won the game 98-87 and limiting the Pacers as much as possible. Games 3 and 4 would show us, though, that these teams might be more equal than the records and playoff standings led on, with a 2-2 series tie, but it's ugly basketball from both sides. Game 3 was dominated by the all-star duo, where they combined for 42 points and once again stayed ahead for the entire game. And Game 4 was the opposite, seeing the Pacers keep the lead the entire time due to a role player masterclass from Ian Mahimi and George Hill. Again, the Raptors are being led by their slow pace and good defense because their stars aren't really playing all that well. But a win is a win, and we can't really take anything away from them if they were to win this way. But finally, with the momentum of the series on the line, we get a good game from both sides. It didn't look like that at first, with the Pacers up 90-77 after the third quarter, but in the fourth quarter, we would see a world-class breakdown from the Pacers, where they would only score 9 points the entire quarter. And with the depth, the Raptors coming through once again, scoring the majority of their points in the comeback, and DeMar DeRozan sealing the game with free throws at the end. The panic button was so close to being pressed if the Raptors would have been down 3-2, but after another Herculean effort from the bench mob, the Raptors only need one more game to go to the second round for the first time since 2001. But you already know what I have to say if you're an NBA historian. Another world-class collapse from the Raptors, with DeMar DeRozan going 3 of 13 and Kyle Lowry going 4 of 14 in a 101-83 loss. So you know what that means. We are getting a Game 7. One of the more painful 7-game series in this decade, with many people seeing if this Raptors team will break apart with the pressure all on them. Well, with a first quarter performance from Demar Derozan with 13 points, we are finally seeing the star everybody has been waiting for, which jump-started the Raptors to control the entirety of Game 7, leading by as much as 14 points. Of course, in true NBA fashion, the Pacers really tried to rally together for a comeback at the end, but with 4 vital turnovers being committed by Paul George, the Raptors escaped with an 89-84 Game 7 victory to finally get out of the first round for the second time in franchise history. An amazing accomplishment, but I remember it like it was yesterday. The amount of people who immediately gave up on the Raptors after this performance was immense. DeMar DeRozan once again showed that he isn't really made for Showtime, having possibly his worst series in his career so far, and was able to escape due to his team's defense and some good performances off the bench from other people. Because they were one Pacers fourth quarter collapse away from being down 3-2, and this conversation would have been completely different. But a series win is a series win, but their performance only made the Cavaliers going back to the finals a much stronger of a bet. And yes, I have to be fair, Kyle Lowry was equally as bad. A lot of credit should have been given to Jonas being a decent paint finisher and Corey Joseph being a real X factor in the series off the bench. But I'll stop for now because we got another formidable defense to go against, this time in the post-LeBron Miami Heat, who are still trying to compete after he left with a 34-year-old D Wade. And we also have to remember this is also the same season where Chris Bosh was forced to retire early due to his blood clot diagnosis. They managed to stay above water without him due to the coaching of Eric Spoelstra and the play of many vets on this team. But again, the Raptors are going from one team who will suffocate you on defense to another team with the blocks leader and all defensive member Hassan Whiteside just waiting for you in the paint. So if the last series was hard, safe to say that this one will also be against another very seasoned team with debatably more talent. So let's just go to this again. Game 1, as you'd expect, a dogfight. A 68-63 beginning of the fourth quarter type of a dogfight. But the fourth quarter had everything that you'd want from both sides. Goran Dragic dicing the Raptors, Corey Joseph coming clutch off the bench again, and a clutch finish to finish things off. 7 seconds left in the game, and the Raptors down by 6. Terrence Ross comes clutch with a three-pointer to slice the lead down to 3. Then after a controversial turnover from the Heat, Terrence Ross is back at the line to bump the lead down even more. And after making the first free throw and missing the second, the hero of the Raptors gets fouled to take 2 free throws. That person being the 65% free throw shooter, Hassan Whiteside. After missing the first, the game is still alive for the Raptors, with the worst case scenario being a 3-point deficit. And after making the second, with no timeouts remaining, it's time for someone to become clutch and send this game into overtime with only 3 seconds remaining.
Makes it. It's a 3-point game. Raptors need a 3 here to tie it and send it into overtime.
Do they give the foul? I would.
Lowry scoops it up. Lowry lets it fly, and it goes! Kyle Lowry! Kyle Lowry makes it!
In another desperate situation where things seemed like there was no plan made, Kyle Lowry threw a Hail Mary over Justice Winslow and made the basket to send this game into overtime. It wasn't a pretty game, but once again, the Raptors showed that they can just barely get by. But their luck would run out in the overtime period as D Wade would turn back the clock and score 7 of the Heat's 10 points to win the game 102-96. It was a great effort, but this is yet another Game 1 L at home the Raptors have to make up for. And if Game 1 wasn't stressful enough for you, how about Game 2, where the game once again came down to the heroics, where the Raptors kept the lead for most of the game, gave it up in the fourth, and now we have another dogfight. Just like last time though, Kyle Lowry came clutch with a mid-range to give the Raptors a 3-point lead, and with 15 seconds remaining, this caused the Heat to call a timeout. But off the timeout, we get even more madness from this series.
Here's Johnson leaning in. Dragic is open, lets it fly, hits the 3 and ties the game at 86. What a play! Goran Dragic with 18 points.
I won't even say anything though. I'm just going to say this one little thing. Damari Carroll, that's completely on you. Also, my mom took a picture with him one time in public, so yeah, shame on you. Horrible defensive awareness. But that's one shot made by Goran Dragic would send things into overtime as Kyle Lowry couldn't get another game winner this time around. This time though, the Raptors would take this game in overtime and tie the series 1-1, and of course, giving the entire NBA fandom the realization that this could be another 7-game classic in the making. Game 3 was dominated by Kyle Lowry getting a playoff high 33 points while making 5 threes, but the Heat immediately snatched Game 4 back with a vintage D-Wade performance, seeing him score 30 points himself. But now the Raptors are even more trouble with Jonas Valanciunas going down with an ankle sprain, having to now fully rely on Bismack Biyombo to be their starting center. Of course, this will turn into him making $72 million with the Magic, but if you watch my Magic rebuild video, you already knew about that. But again, we are met with another 2-2 series tie, and no team is giving up any room with world-class defensive performances on both sides. And for Demar Derozan, unfortunately, doing his usual. But if they want to win off of it, can't really say much now, can I? But just like the last 2 games, both teams split victories in the same way as Game 5 was fully controlled by the Raptors and Game 6 from the Heat. So we arrive at another Game 7 in the same fashion as the first round. No team is giving up any momentum in this series, but now with home court advantage in Game 7 in the roaring Air Canada Center, we finally see the Miami Heat run out of gas and our dynamic duo looking like they did in the regular season. Kyle Lowry torched the Heat for 35 points, and Demar Derozan came through with another 28 himself to dominate the Miami Heat with the final score of 116-89. And that means they made the conference finals. Yes, the conference finals for the first time in their franchise history. And what a way to do it. Getting past 2 very formidable teams in 2 straight 7-game series where a lot of clutchness was needed to get here in the first place, but the celebration can't go on for too long because now you're going against the true apex predators of the Eastern Conference, and that's the Cleveland Cavaliers, led by LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love. And guess what? The Raptors were considered heavy underdogs in this series, with every single person on the expert panel at ESPN saying they was either going to lose in 5 or 6 games. And truly, can you even blame them from saying that when we really went through all of this stuff so far? But I will give the Raptors this. The Cavaliers aren't exactly a team that prioritizes defense, but the only problem is the Cavaliers are the best offensive rated team in the league and are one of the best 3-point shooting teams out there. So you have to deal with LeBron James being unguardable, Kyrie Irving scoring, and Kevin Love and others 3-point shooting. This will be the hardest series for the Raptors, and it isn't even because of the defense awaiting them. It's because they have to outscore this LeBron-led offense. And this is without their third leading scorer and Jonas Valanciunas too. And immediately you see the issue I spoke about before, coming in with a 2-0 series deficit being created immediately with a combined loss amount of 40 points in 2 games. Now, what the fuck happened? Well, it's true the Raptors don't have anyone who can stop the scoring barrage of an all-NBA duo of LeBron James and Kyrie Irving, and the fact that they ended the game by halftime. Game 1 came down to a 22-point deficit by halftime, and Game 2, it was 14 points by halftime. Once the Cavaliers have a lead of that magnitude, you aren't coming back. So what really can you do at this point? Well, you hope for something to happen to go your way. Game 3 was headlined by Demar Derozan being nearly perfect out there for 32 points, and the Raptors containing Kyrie Irving to a 3 of 19 shooting night, which gave them a win of 99-84 at home. And Game 4 was another game where the Raptors dominated by as much as 18 in the third quarter. However, the Cavaliers would come back after a 3-point clinic where they made 10 second-half threes. The Raptors were able to hold out on their own, though, and win 105-99 due to Kyle and Demar sealing the game. This would tie the series 2-2 and give a lot of people hope to everyone that perhaps this trio LeBron created can be taken down. That hope, unfortunately, will be crushed ASAP because Game 5 back in Cleveland, the Cavaliers would see the Big Three combine for 71 points and take a halftime lead of 65-34 due to the Raptors getting shut down with 10 first-half turnovers. I really got nothing else to say. DeMar and Kyle got locked up and the Cavs went about things as usual. And for the final nail in the coffin, back in Canada, unfortunately, the Cavaliers would dominate again with a 14-point lead, and they never looked back, winning Game 6 113-87. And every loss, the Raptors would lose by more than 15 points, and in each of those games, it would be over by halftime. Despite the series going to 6, the Cavaliers would completely pick apart and dismantle the Raptors, coming off their best season in franchise history, and it was really interesting to witness as the Cavs showed themselves to be on a completely different level. DeMar and Kyle would play well this series, sure, but they aren't dealing with the type of talent in the first place with two Hall of Famers, and Kyrie Irving in his prime, and LeBron James looking for revenge after last year's finals against the Warriors. Was this just a simple example of not being able to do anything and completely being helpless, or are the Raptors going to improve themselves to be on equal footing of the king of basketball himself. Well, again, I wouldn't put it on anyone to say that there was no team that could possibly deal with the Cavaliers at this time, and they either have to wait their turn or, God forbid, hope for an injury to happen. But the topic of this video is about Demar Derozan's shortcomings in the playoffs, and there are 2 more series in a row where they would be sent back home early if it wasn't for his team's defense and depth. But in this series, he lost against Cleveland, and he played well as he could. But this team is nowhere near the level of talent of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So with the postseason coming to a close, the Cavaliers winning the championship in miraculous fashion, the Raptors and DeMar now have to be faced that the true best team in the East is the Cavaliers. But what will it take for them to be on some type of equal footing to them? Lord knows, but what we do know is it takes a lot to beat LeBron James, and DeMar Derozan is going to have to do more if he wants to even sniff the NBA Finals. So what more can he or the Raptors do? Guess we're just going to have to wait and see. Every year so far has been a step in the right direction in some way. We first see Masai get rid of some people that created the first prosperous season for Toronto in years. Then a key addition in Lou Will comes in for the Raptors to do slightly better. And finally, we have the first ever Raptors Conference Finals appearance due to transformation of Kyle Lowry, DeMar Derozan becoming a much more efficient scorer, and the Raptors in general becoming much more balanced as a team. But they met a huge brick wall in the form of LeBron James, who after the year of 2011 has made the finals every single year in the Eastern Conference, both on the Miami Heat and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So if you want to make the finals, you have to get through him first. However, that also does mean that you have to either make a team capable of slowing down his own team, slowing down LeBron himself, which isn't easy, or go band for band with his team in talent. When you look at those 3 options, the Raptors currently don't qualify for any of them, but Masai Ujiri would at least try his best to come up with something, because if they can take down LeBron, then the Raptors can go to the finals, as the Eastern Conference was basically either LeBron's or the Raptors to take this season. So let's speed through free agency and the draft, because there wouldn't unfortunately be much to talk about. The Raptors would pick up Jakob Poeltl from Utah, who exploded onto the NCAA scene as a sophomore with 9th pick, and another player with a similar story in Pascal Siakam with the 27th pick to help them with their incoming front court troubles. In free agency, they signed Jared Sullinger, who's already 1 foot out of the league, with a 1-year, $5 million deal, and signed undrafted free agent Fred VanVleet. And that's it. No, that's really it. In the same period, we see Luis Scola go to Brooklyn, and of course, see Bismack Biyombo go to the Orlando Magic on a very big deal. So let's be real, the Raptors got slightly worse, and that won't fare well in a potential rematch versus the Cavaliers. But Rome wasn't built in a day, and perhaps there wasn't much that Masai could have done in this situation. But I do know one thing though, DeMar Derozan will receive his first big boy contract with a 5-year, $139 million deal, and he definitely deserves it for all he has done in making basketball in Toronto great again. But the goal is to bring the Larry O'Brien trophy to the Six, and this is where the 2017 season begins. And this is also where DeMar Derozan makes himself known that he is very much worth that contract, and he can be relied upon to lead his team to the finish line. With a 22-8 record by Christmas, the Raptors were back trying to go after that top place in the Eastern Conference, only 2 games behind who else but LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And while that was just the same story as last year, the real development this time around was the fact that DeMar Derozan was looking completely brand new with his newfound responsibility, having to do more as a scorer, and he took that with open arms. Averaging a career-high 27 points per game on similar efficiency to last year, puts him top 5 in points per game, and dare I say, sometimes he looked damn near unstoppable. In the first 12 games alone, he went for 40 points twice and 30 points 8 separate times, making it really seem like he was on a revenge season to go to the NBA Finals. I'd be motivated too after what happened last year, but this start to the season, he had really put the Raptors back as another contender in the East. So as the season rolled on though, there would be little bumps in the road, like an 8-9 record in January, as they would fall down to the 3rd seed after getting jumped by Isaiah Thomas's led Boston Celtics. But we can finally stop at the All-Star break, where both DeMar and Kyle will be celebrated as All-Stars, with DeMar making it for the 3rd time with his first time as a starter, and Kyle Lowry's 2nd time around. But he would be on the bench. But the Raptors were still continuing their issues, starting February 2-5, slipping ever so slightly as being as low as the 5th seed in the standings. So when your team is struggling, what do you as a franchise need to do? The obvious answer is to make a move, and the perfect move would come just a few days later, because on February 14th, 2017, the Toronto Raptors would trade Terrence Ross and a 2017 first-round pick to the Orlando Magic for the services of Serge Ibaka. And yes, I know I made my Magic video last month talking about this trade, but now you're going to hear me talk about it again, because the Raptors were in serious need of some defense in the paint, with rookie Pascal Siakam starting at the 4 and Jonas Valanciunas not exactly being the best rim protector in the world. But adding a in his prime Serge Ibaka to the team for basically nothing is an amazing move by Masai Ujiri. Only problem is he's on an expiring contract, but this team needs talent, and Serge has a few more good years in him left to serve as another piece to this championship puzzle in the future. And he absolutely did everything he needed to do for the team as they ended their season 18-7, as Serge would average 14 points, shot nearly 40% from 3, and of course added the paint defense that Raptors desperately needed. With this, the Raptors ended their season with their second 50-win season in a row at 51-31. They had a slip up in the midpoint of the season and even saw Kyle Lowry get wrist surgery after the All-Star break that had him miss 21 games, but the Raptors are fully healthy and ready to take on the playoffs once more. First though, this season would see Demar Derozan finally get recognized as one of the best players at his position, being awarded a place on the All-NBA third team, being the 5th best scorer in the league, and of course, leading his team to one of the best records in the conference. But due to their little slip up in the season, they are unfortunately stuck with the 3rd seed in the Eastern playoffs. But without thinking too hard, you'd say, who cares? But when you take a look at this bracket, the Cavaliers are at the 2nd spot, which means the Cavs are officially their 2nd round matchup instead of another conference finals meeting. And you know what? When I even looked into this more, I found it even funnier. The Cavs lost 4 straight games in a row, and the Raptors beat them in the last game of the season that ended up sealing their fate for an early rematch, because the Cavaliers were resting Kyrie Irving and LeBron in the last 2 games, with some reporting that they were even gunning for the Raptors as their 2nd round matchup, as they lost those 2 games with LeBron and Kyrie before that. But can you really blame them? But let's forget about that. The Raptors made it to the playoffs, and the Cavs are not their first matchup. It's the 42-40 Milwaukee Bucks, led by the most improved player, Giannis Antetokounmpo. And as usual, this wasn't going to be an easy one, because the game 1 in the first round trend continues. The Milwaukee Bucks won their first game 97-83 in a dominant defensive fashion, and headlined by the MIP himself, scoring 28 points. But what happened with the Raptors this time around? Well, Demar Derozan starts off this playoff run going 7 of 21 from the field, being the slasher that he's known to be, and also drawing 14 free throws and only missing 1, which really kept the Raptors in the game despite the other shooting performance. But when that whistle isn't on his side, there's not much more scoring he can really do. Also, Kyle Lowry went 2 of 11 and only scored 4 measly points. And let it be known, the Bucks in the regular season were in the bottom half for defense in the league, but the playoffs could create the weirdest of things, as we've seen in this video. Game 2 was controlled by the Raptors the entire time, while Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan took turns scoring on the Bucks, but Milwaukee never gave up the entire time, even seeing Giannis making the 3 to tie the game 100-100 at the 2-minute mark. But they would score no more after that point, and the Raptors would clutch it out to win 106-100. But back in Milwaukee for Game 3, the Bucks would shut down the Raptors to only score 77 points and beat them 104-77. Despite the weaker defense from the Bucks in the regular season, the Bucks at this time played with a very tall lineup that was very switchable and created a lot of havoc on defense, and this game was a huge proponent of them coming out of this thing very easily. DeMar DeRozan only attempted 8 shots and missed all of them, but of course 8 of 8 from the free throw line, and the Raptors gave up by the third quarter. But a 32-12 first quarter deficit from the Raptors doesn't help their case at all. Game 4 though, we finally see a change for the better. Dwayne Casey finally went and changed the starting lineup, putting Jonas Valanciunas on the bench for Norman Powell to create more spacing for the team and allow the Raptors to finally play 5-out basketball with Serge Ibaka at the center spot. And it turned into DeMar DeRozan's best game, scoring 33 points on 12 of 22 shooting and controlling the entirety of the game to win and tie this series 2-2 with a score of 87-76. With this change, the Raptors finally found the sauce that they needed to win this series and went ahead and ran with it. 118-93 in Game 5, seeing 6 players score over double digits, and finally Game 6 with the opportunity to end this series. It was once again another game controlled by the Raptors, going into the fourth quarter 74-63. But leave it to the NBA to give us a good playoff game when it's needed, because a mix of Giannis and the bench mob started slowly chipping away at that lead as the Raptors struggled to score to the point where the Bucks tied the game at 80-80. But that woke up the Raptors enough to close out the game and finally get out of this series alive, winning 4-2 by a score of 92-94. to 89. Now, is it considered a red flag that they struggle with the Bucks? Well, according to my rules in basketball, they found a way to win, so I really can't say much to them. After one lineup change, everything opened up for the Raptors, and they finally finished the series with that one little change. But that doesn't matter because the Apex Predators return, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, who wanted to run it back for obvious reasons. And if last year was difficult, then this year will be even worse with less talent on the team to deal with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So you know what this means. This relies on the shoulders of DeMar DeRozan more and more. So you know what this means. Game 1 was over by the fourth quarter with a 96-77 deficit, and them losing Game 1 as LeBron James scored a game-high 35 points while the Raptors struggled from all over and giving up 22 turnovers. Game 2 had a fourth quarter deficit of 99-73 and a final score of 125-103 with, again, LeBron James scoring 39 points and only missing 4 shots out of 14 and drawing 21 free throws, while DeMar went 2 of 11 from the field. And for extra insult to injury, no pun intended, Kyle Lowry would roll his ankle right before halftime and would be out for the rest of this series due to that. So now it's really on DeMar to get past this juggernaut all by himself. But finally, Game 3, we would see a close fourth quarter start, 79-77, and the Raptors only down by 2. DeMar woken up for his Canadian fans and scored 36 points in the first 3 quarters alone to keep his team in the game, but in the fourth quarter, the Cavaliers would show once again why they are a top 3 offense in the NBA, going 11 of 14 from the field and 4 of 5 from 3 for 36 points, torching the Raptors in the final frame to win 115-94. And yes, as you'd imagine, DeMar DeRozan did not do much in the fourth quarter. By this point, it's over. The Raptors are without their second best player, and even a world-class performance from DeMar doesn't mean anything when the Cavaliers can just turn it up a notch at any moment. And it was getting to the Raptors, especially the star of the team.
Sometimes it's not even about LeBron. LeBron's going to be LeBron. We got to key out other guys. You know, we can't let Channing Frye go out there and get 20 points. We can't let other guys like that get going. You know, it's just, you know, you find somebody who stopped LeBron, you know, in these moments. You know, I give you $100. You know,
in the world of sports, a very vital part that the average person always forgets about is the fact that there is a mental factor to everything. And DeMar DeRozan just lost. With the viral interview going online, he has shown the world that he thinks that LeBron James is unguardable and jokingly says he will give money for someone to stop him. And while some could say it's a joke and he makes a very good point, it really shows the mentality that he has checked out and knows he cannot win. Let me remind you again, in the clip from the beginning of the video, DeMar literally said that because LeBron left, it was his time to win. He understands that LeBron isn't beatable unless you are equally as great as him or can out-talent his team. In this current state, he can't do anything, and mentally speaking, he thinks the same himself. So let's go on and get this over with. Game 4 comes down a couple of days later, and the Raptors are on their wits end, trying not to get swept, and it looks like the same old story once again. A 61-49 deficit at halftime started by a 16-point second quarter performance by Kyle Korver, but credit where credit is due. The depth of the Raptors were not going down without a fight, and were able to finally come back with only 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, mainly by the efforts of Corey Joseph getting 6 assists in the third quarter by himself and leading a 31-point Raptors third quarter. And after that, it was just a starting lineup using that momentum to go on and finish the job. After that point, though, it was just like last game. The Cavaliers decided to go on and finish things and end the game on a 15-9 run and complete the sweep with the final score of 109-102. The second straight sweep of this Cavaliers versus Raptors rivalry. And yet another example of LeBron being the ultimate gatekeeper of the Eastern Conference. So just like the last section, what can you really do? Sure, DeMar has shown himself to be a top-tier scorer in the league, but that was just in the regular season. He's still a victim of having bad games and isn't good enough to keep up with LeBron toe-to-toe or even guard him for that matter. Another year where LeBron goes to the finals, and yet another year where the Raptors are back to the drawing board. Not the best performance all throughout the playoffs again from DeMar, so there's really no way to beat him if DeMar is your best player, and at some point, you're just going to have to admit that. But he just got paid, so the Raptors are stuck waiting for their turn, potentially. So going into the next season, is there any real way to level up, or do they keep trying to see if DeMar and Kyle Lowry is enough to get the job done? Time is ticking, and the Eastern Conference is slowly getting better in the background. So it's best to go on and get this championship sooner rather than later. It's crazy to think that somehow, some way, the Toronto Raptors have seen themselves swept by the Cleveland Cavaliers once again. On one hand, it makes sense, but on the other, it really shows the world of difference between the talent of these two teams, even though obviously LeBron James created that Cleveland Cavaliers team for that very purpose. But just like how teams out west are trying to keep up with the Warriors, like the James Harden-led Rockets, the San Antonio Spurs, and soon to be the OKC Thunder, who's about to add Paul George. But while the West is doing their arms race to keep up with the Joneses, can the Raptors in the East even somehow do the same? Especially when their best player are soon to be a 31-year-old Kyle Lowry and Demar Derozan leading the charge. Well, funny enough, we see the opposite of this being done. But first, with the pick they were given by the Milwaukee Bucks in the Grievous Vasquez trade, the Toronto Raptors would pick up OG Anunoby from Indiana with the 23rd pick, who is a great all-around prospect with huge 3-and-D upside for the NBA. And then going into free agency, we see the likes of Kyle Lowry get signed back with the team on a 3-year, $100 million deal that'll take him until he's 34 years old. Obviously not the best value deal if he starts to fall off soon, but the goal is to win a championship and keep your star happy, and that is what is getting done. Next, we see the Raptors retain Serge Ibaka back on a 3-year, $65 million deal to make him a main piece on this championship core, while also making the trade earlier that much more worth it. But this also comes with a necessary change of things, as only 6 days later, the Raptors would offload the contract of DeMar Carroll to the Nets in a trade with a first and second round pick to open up more cap space in the summer. Because the 2018 free agency class is stacked with talent all over, and the 2019 class is even somehow better. So even if things don't work out now, there is always the possibility of trying to attract a star to play for Toronto. So with that trade done, that means the Raptors are in a very weird place. No new primary additions were added, unless you count CJ Miles to be one. So that means the Raptors are relying on the next generation of players to step up and do something. Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Jakob Poeltl, DeLon Wright, and Norman Powell. All of them would need to put in some work for the Raptors to get anywhere, but at least the Raptors can rest well in one regard, as the Cleveland Cavaliers have potentially fallen off a cliff with the trade of Kyrie Irving going to the Boston Celtics and their myriad of older free agents on the verge of retirement. So this is an opportunity of a lifetime for DeMar Derozan and the Raptors that have been waiting for. No more big three, it's LeBron James, Kevin Love, and a bunch of vets. Can this finally be the year that they make it all the way with the wall of LeBron torn down by their internal drama? Well, going on and rushing into the All-Star break, it's safe to say that the Raptors really did see this as their year to dominate the Eastern Conference. At the break, they owned a record of 41-16, which was 3 games over the first seed. And of course, they had the second best offense in the league, the 5th best defense, and had the 2nd best margin of victory in the NBA that year. With LeBron James and the Cavaliers breaking down due to the Kyrie Irving trade, and many of the young players who are up and coming still not there to compete seriously, if there was any year to make a finals run, this is the year. Both Kyle Lowry and DeMar Derozan return back to the All-Star game. Their young players also strides and flashes of potential as future members of a strong core. And honestly, it's just good times all around, and no one can stop them. When you have DeMar Derozan and Kyle Lowry controlling the offense, a top 5 3-point shooting team, and young players who can be plugged in to do their role, there weren't many ways you could argue that the Raptors were the team to make it out of the East and stop the long streak of LeBron making it to the finals in the conference. So let's just stop wasting time. The Raptors will go on and end their season 18-7 and blow their last franchise record of wins in a season out of the water with a 59-23 record. The first seed in the East and home court advantage all throughout the Eastern Conference playoffs. Down the board, you can congratulate many people on this team for their efforts in creating this amazing regular season, with Dwayne Casey being awarded with his first ever Coach of the Year award, and DeMar Derozan ranking up in the All-NBA ranks, now being with the second team this year around. While I could spend another 3 to 5 minutes just talking about what went into this great season all of the team, we know exactly what we're here for, and that's the Raptors going on to prepare for the NBA playoffs. With this record they worked so very hard for, the Raptors guaranteed their home court advantage, a potential easier road to the finals, and some revenge on the Cavaliers, who will be fighting with the Indiana Pacers in the first round, looking like a shell of their former selves. So let's go on and start our journey in the playoffs once again. DeMar Derozan's 5th playoff appearance, possibly the easiest road they'll ever get, and a final spout in the making if they play their cards right. Their first round matchup this time around is against an old foe that swept them only a few years ago Toronto and the Washington Wizards, who are the 8th seed and have an amazing matchup against them. So will the Raptors continue their dominance in the regular season? In the playoffs, well, game 1 starts off in a pretty interesting fashion. DeMar and Kyle Lowry weren't the stars of the game. It was actually an 11-point fourth quarter from DeLon Wright that put the Raptors in position to make a late game run to win it 114-106. And game 2 was dominated by Demar Derozan, getting a game-high 37 points and seeing 5 other players score over 10. This is the depth and dominance that Raptors fans and supporters were waiting to see finally in the playoffs, with them getting 2 pretty good wins that shows that they are quite possibly ready to go on and take that next step. However, back in Washington, we see the Raptors give up some steam in the series with the duo of John Wall and Bradley Beal, both scoring 28 points apiece. But just like last time they faced, John Wall also dominated with his playmaking, getting 14 dimes and winning Game 3, 122-103. And Game 4 was originally dominated by the Raptors, but after a 40-point third quarter from the Wizards, the score going into the fourth quarter was 80-80. With that momentum, the Wizards would finally finish the job, with Jay Wall and Brad Beal combining for 18 fourth quarter points to win 106-98. Is it time to sound the alarms, or they are a better matchup than the Raptors actually gave them credit for? Well, with all the pressure on them, they didn't break once again. Game 5 back in Toronto was led by a 32-point masterclass from DeMar Derozan with 3 threes behind them, but hit the win 108-98. And finally, in Game 6, Kyle Lowry's 24, the defense of the Raptors sealed the series with another 10-point win, 102-92, to win the series 4-2. No red flags, just a false alarm. The Raptors are still the dominant team everyone knows them to be. And with the revenge on the Wizards for the sweep that they gave them a few years back, now we have a sweeter brand of it coming in the next round against the Cleveland Cavaliers, who went to 7 mighty games with the Pacers and look so much weaker than years past. Kyrie Irving is gone. They have the 2nd worst defense in the league. Their team has clear chemistry issues, and the list of those problems go on and on. But the main reason they beat the Pacers was due to LeBron James averaging 34 points and making many clutch shots. So the question remains, can you outplay LeBron James, even when the talent around him isn't the best? Because we've seen the Boston Celtics do it back when he was young, and after that point, he's been on super team after super team. Now it's time for the Raptors to slay the dragon that is LeBron James and make it to the next round and prove that DeMar Derozan is worthy enough to win a championship to the viewers, to the front office, and to himself. But Game 1 proved off the bat that it wasn't going to be easy, just like it was for the Indiana Pacers. The Cavaliers still own one of the best offenses in the league and would see J.R. Smith and Kyle Korver both make 5 threes apiece to keep them in the game, where the Cavaliers had to come back by as much as 10 points in the final 10 minutes of the fourth quarter. And in the last few minutes is when LeBron would do his usual clutch antics, starting off with a layup to cut the lead down to 2, and finally to tie the game, a very high difficult turnaround jumper over his primary defender and OG Anunoby with only 30 seconds left. In their third go-around, even while in their weakest form, the Cavaliers are still going to give the Raptors trouble due to their lethal offense and being able to outscore you with their barrage of 3-point shooters, and LeBron James simply being LeBron James. And LeBron would end the game with 2 early assists to his snipers and Kyle Korver and J.R. Smith in overtime, and surviving Game 1 off of a missed Fred VanVleet game-winning shot, 113-112. Now, this can be excused. The Raptors blew a lead, sure, and lost an OT, but if this is the worst they have to deal with, then this series can be very manageable. But then Game 2 happened. 43 points and 14 assists from LeBron, 31 points from Kevin Love, and for extra insult to injury, 4 threes by Uncle Jeff Green. The Raptors at home once again got dominated by their biggest foes, and it wasn't a pretty thing, seeing them lose Game 2, 128-110. Defense wins championships, but defending superstars in the playoffs is another thing to also consider. LeBron has made it here to this point off his godly performances and is continuing it now. Stopping his teammates, limiting him, or outscoring the Cavaliers is the only option that you can have to even think about beating him. And with them also losing home court advantage now, it'll only make this comeback that much harder. But then Game 2 would go on and also start a new thing for NBA fans to enjoy for this series, and that is the legendary LeBron toe meme, a signifier that LeBron James in 3 series so far has only lost twice and is on his way to sweep them again officially. And if he pulls that off, there will be hell to pay. Now in Cleveland, Ohio, this is a must-win game for the Raptors. Losing means LeBron has all the momentum and he's ending it no matter what, as he is known to do in these situations. Winning it also means you can try and figure out what worked and maximize it even more for this next game and beyond. But with a 79-67 deficit going into the fourth quarter, it looks like the Raptors are just never meant to get over this LeBron-sized hump. But that was until a mix of OG Anunoby making 3 threes in the quarter and a clutch 15-point performance from Kyle Lowry saving the game. And with OG Anunoby making another 3 with only 8 seconds left in the game, officially tying the game for the first time since it was 0-0 from tip-off, the Raptors stayed resilient and are looking to go into overtime with the Cavs again to fight for their series to continue. But 8 seconds is more than enough for the Cavaliers to end the game, and by the Cavaliers, I mean the best player in this series.
Some pressure here.
And now the big thing is make sure you do not foul anybody here on the dribble.
It's going to be James.
Sure, here it is. See, it's under
3 seconds to go. Throws up the floater. Golf ball! Good night, Cleveland. That is for you.
Yep, LeBron put it into his own hands and pulled off a shot that you'd only see in Horse to seal the game with no time remaining and get a 105-103 win. So I ask again, what can you even do in this situation? You can't guard LeBron, his team has too many offensive weapons, and your stars, well, they just aren't good enough. And in the usual LeBron James closer fashion, he does not play with his food and goes for 29 to end the series in a sweep and beat the Raptors 128-93 and loses to LeBron for the 3rd time in a row and only has been able to beat LeBron 2 times in 14 playoff games. And this is where the breakdown starts. 4 days later, May 11, 2018, after winning Coach of the Year, Dwayne Casey would be fired. The first time a Coach of the Year has ever been fired in the same season after winning it. And crazy thing to see, but some could argue a necessary change considering the abuse the Raptors have seen at the hands of the Cavaliers and more specifically, LeBron James. But this won't be the only change that comes in, because if the name of the game is owning a top player in the NBA to win a championship, and DeMar has shown you that he can't get it done, it's time to do some risky business in the biggest trade gamble in possibly NBA history. July 18th, 2028, Demar Derozan will be traded alongside Jakob Poeltl for the one-time NBA champion Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. The move of the summer and an absolute heartbreaker to the fans of Toronto who watched Demar turn into what he is now after being drafted so many years ago. But the man above him, Masai Ujiri, has to make the tough decisions, and it was a necessary one. Demar Derozan isn't the man for the job to take him to the top, and Kawhi was available for trade. There's no way you don't go for gold when you've been shown time and time again that your current core isn't good enough to compete with the worst LeBron team he has had in his second stint in Cleveland. But for the final few minutes of this video, let's roll it back to what he said on First Take.
The only person we couldn't beat was LeBron. That's just what it was. And I felt off the year we had before, we just needed one more piece to kind of push us over the top. And that piece came to be LeBron going to the West. And I didn't get an opportunity to see what would have happened, but the utmost confidence within myself, I have no doubt in my mind the same outcome would have happened.
No, Demar, you were the final piece that needed to be changed for the Raptors to go any further, and that's why the trade was made. Throughout this entire hour-long video, we've gone through example after example after example of Demar's shortcomings in the playoffs and how he'll shrink in times of need, especially when it came to dealing with LeBron James. What the Raptors need is a player that is high enough in the NBA hierarchy that can actually compete with LeBron James 1-for-1, and one of the only few players that fits the bill is someone like Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard is someone who was willing to guard Giannis when his team was struggling in the conference finals. Kawhi Leonard will go out there fearless in all situations and remain to look like a superstar against top defenses and defenders in the NBA playoffs like he did in 2019. Kawhi Leonard is willing to do any and everything, play both sides of the ball as the leader on both sides to get that championship in 2019. And yes, while it took a very interesting circumstance for that championship to happen, his route to that championship was everything that DeMar wouldn't be able to do. I don't think he realizes just how good the conference got immediately in that next year. The Bucks owned the MVP in the season in Giannis and won 60 games. The 76ers had their ridiculous team with Jimmy Butler, Embiid, and Ben Simmons. The Celtics had their best year with Kyrie Irving, and the Pacers had some of the best depth in the NBA and a top 3 defense, something that DeMar unfortunately has trouble scoring against in the postseason. This conference, while top heavy, had double the amount of contenders from last year, and no series played by you at the helm has ever been a piece of cake. We get on owners for making moves like this, but this move, despite being painful for the fans and especially Kyle Lowry, ended up working out, and it was for a reason. He knew a change had to be made, and rather than keep the fun times rolling with you and Kyle, he knew Kyle only had a few more good years left, and the ceiling of the team would rise with Kawhi, even if it was only 1 year, rather than you forever. Because if that was going to be the case, it'd rather as well be a better Vince Carter era. Good regular season teams can't get it done in the playoffs, but at least Toronto has their poster child to root for every year. Bull fucking shit. I'm sure every Raptors fan will take the championship he brought over 5 or more years of what you and Kyle would do together as y'all would both get older and of course be considered Toronto Raptors legends. And to that point, it only gets proven more and more in every stop he take after the fact. A regular season performer, even though obviously he showed us what more he can do when he went to Chicago, but you don't create a championship team behind DeMar DeRozan as your best player. You make it with a top 10 player because those are usually the ones who will dominate when the time comes. And DeMar DeRozan is not the type who has ever shown himself to do that consistently enough for that move to be made with any regrets in the eyes of the fans or management. With that being said, tell me what team or player timeline you like to see next, your thoughts on this video and topic, and until next time.